Hey, what's up, YouTube, and welcome to my channel, Ask Jimmy Smith. I'm extremely pumped to bring to you another repricing video. I have kind of a series of videos on repricers if you're looking to check those out, but one that I have recommended for years at this point. It's actually in my book that I recommend this in Side Hustle to Full-Time Income, which is Aura. Now, this repricer has been around for a few years at this point, but I remember there was a meteoric rise when Aura came out because it was so popular and it did so well for sellers. And what's great is I'm able to now bring on Dillon, one of the founders of Aura, to discuss these massive enhancements that they have for their repricing features. They've brought in artificial intelligence. They brought in some of the new SP API, which is a whole change of how Amazon allowed selling partners or software partners to access their data. Well, with that comes even more enhancements to create better instant repricing. And so we talk about the foundations of repricing. We talk about the exciting changes that they have right now. And we also get into a demo of all of those new changes, how you can utilize them in your business, so much more. This video is packed with a bunch of information that you may just want to have to go back through and watch again. So if you're interested in checking out Aura, you can head over to askjimmysmith.com/Aura. That's AURA. The link is below and in the description. Before we get into the interview with Dillon, I do want to mention that there is a contest running on this video and on every video where you can be entered in to win a copy of my Amazon best-selling book, Side Hustle to Full-Time Income. All you have to do is leave a comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and tune into the next video that I post where the winner from this video will be announced. So if you check that out, you can send me an email if you're a winner. We'll make sure and verify the winners, and then we will get you a physical copy of the book, which also comes with a free audiobook and a free mini course as well. So go ahead and leave a comment down below and you'll be entered in to win next time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this awesome video on Aura 1.0, their new features with Dillon Carter. Hey, Dillon, thank you so much for joining me on the YouTube channel today. I'm really excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Dillon, I know that's something that we just met recently. I've actually recommended Aura for a long time, and so I'm really excited to be able to talk to you about Aura and to talk a little bit about you and kind of the background of the company and then the future of where you guys are going. So let's jump right into it. For anybody that doesn't know who you are and a little bit about Aura, would you mind giving us a little bit of a background?
Sure. Yeah. So for me, specifically started with hearing about the whole FBA thing via the Smart Passive Income podcast with Pat Flynn, the Selling Family. I was like, this sounds insane. And did kind of the traditional, I'm going to call it a traditional path that every seller goes through, right? You go from this is the thing to let's go see if it's real, in which case you go to a Target or a Walmart, you scan a few things, ship it in, and it sells. And you're like, okay, it is real. I proved that to myself. Now, what does that mean?
Mhm.
Um, and so started going really heavy on retail arbitrage. Eventually got to a point where I'm like, this doesn't really scale. I was going back to school full time as a finance major, so time was kind of limited. And so attempted to do online arbitrage. At that time, it was not as easy as it is now, it seems. Or maybe it was just me. I'm not sure. I was not very good at it. And said, okay, well, what's the next thing I could actually do, right? And you kind of hit that first fork, if you will, which is wholesale or private label. And so I went the wholesale route because I needed to pay the bills. I needed cash flow. Private label is great for standing up a brand and exiting it down the line. Um, and so did that and really put myself into a corner and said, hey, I'm not allowed to buy inventory unless it's wholesale, even if it's profitable. Kind of had to force that, right? And
Mhm.
so it took a few months for me to really get an understanding of it. And then it clicked. And then so I started to scale that out. Um, and then eventually met my now co-founder, James. I was essentially at six figures in revenue, reaching out to everybody who seemed to be at seven just to say, hey, I'll pay you for an hour of your time. Um, I just want to understand the gap. What's the difference between being at six and seven figures? And then James was the first one to actually respond and say, hey, don't worry about the money. Let's just geek out, right? Like we don't get to talk as often about this kind of stuff, especially back then. Wholesale was considered like for the big boys, so to speak.
Mhm.
And that just wasn't true. And so it was nice to be able to have a weekly conversation. And eventually, through sharing, what's your process for this? What's my process for that? We realized we were doing the same thing, but hacking it using tools like Trello, Google Sheets, Zapier back then. Um, and we're like, it'd be nice if we just built our own software to do this, like built for sellers. And so come to find out, my co-founder James is actually a computer science major. So he's like, I can write code. Let's do this. And so we launched VinDriveCRM.com, which was super niche. It's still around, but we really made a ton of mistakes with that product in terms of just it being so niche that like really couldn't blossom into a profitable business. But that's okay because we learned a lot and really found a passion in software and SaaS. And so we paused and said, okay, well, we've proved to ourselves we understand how to build product. We want to do this. Let's go decide what we think we could have the biggest impact with. And we landed on repricing because at the time, being sellers, we used repricing tools and we didn't really love it.
Mm.
There was a lack of product. And when I say product in tech, I mean like the UI, the UX, how things work, these subtle nuances. And so we set to build that out. And we launched Aura in December of 2018, and it took off immediately. Eventually, we graduated college, both of us moved the company up to Boston, started building the company itself, the team, all that good stuff. Like we don't outsource anything. Everybody is in-house on the team. And yeah, we've just been growing since then. It's been a crazy roller coaster.
Wow, that's so awesome. I know that Aura I remember it just kind of came out of nowhere from my vantage point because I've been selling since December 2015. I don't know if you knew that
Okay.
or not. So there were all these other repricers and I've gone through some of them at different times, but Aura just became popular very quick,
Yeah.
which it was a testament to what you guys had built. And so it's exciting to see where you guys are going now too, as a company. But one thing that I did want to hit on, because you were reaching out to people then, and that's how you met James, your business partner. You're reaching out about how to go from 6 to 7 figures and what that difference is. I'm curious if you have an answer now for that, or if he had an answer that may have been different back then than you would give now.
Yeah, it's slightly more meta, right? It's not about a tactic. It's really understanding what you're actually doing. So I did a podcast interview yesterday and kind of got a similar answer, right? Like, what's the thing you would recommend that you think people miss the most, especially on the wholesale side? And my answer was understanding that the difference between doing RAOA and wholesale is not how you source. The skill set is actually sales. Because think about it. What are you doing? You're cold outreaching to a brand to sell them to approve you. That's a skill and it's called sales. And so understanding, okay, well, it's not really a capital problem. It's not really even a sourcing problem if you understand the basics of how to find in-demand products and then how to go find. I typically work directly with brands instead of distributors. It is more difficult, but I found that those relationships were deeper and I had a little bit more leverage there. That's difficult. And so once you understand that process, it's really a numbers game, right? It's basic, it's sales 101, right? What's your conversion rate, right? How many brands do you need to call to get approved to get at least one SKU that you're going to profit from? And then if you reverse that out, you now have a daily goal. And so for me, based on the conversion rates, it was call 10 brands. If I called 10 solid brands per day, I knew I could at least open one account. So 10%, actually, I'd take that back. It was a 40%, 30 to 40% open rate. So I knew I'd open 3 to 4. Out of 3 to 4, maybe one would have enough profit there for me to place a test order.
Wow.
So if I wanted to add one new SKU per week, I knew how to do it. And so that was the big thing. It's scale, right? That's really it.
Yeah. And once you hit the max of what you can reach out for, then you have to bring other people and train them to do the same things. And it's just building a business at that point. So
that's
makes a lot of sense. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I am curious before we kind of get into what Aura specifically is doing with Aura 1.0. What is kind of your thoughts on how should sellers be looking at repricing? Why did Aura start to go this way? And well, I guess a different direction, let's say. Let's kind of get to that foundation first.
Yeah, so we we kind of took a step back on product to build the team out, right? That we're fully bootstrapped, profitable company. We're a small team too, right? So as we spent more time hiring, recruiting, all that good stuff, we eventually had more capacity and said, okay, let's get back to product. That's what we love to do. And Aura had grown so fast to such a high scale. We're like, wow, the infrastructure, the architecture of what Aura was designed to do 7 years ago was awesome. Now, not as much. And so you get to a point where you have to make very strategic product decisions, not only for the company, but for your users. And so we sat down and said, well, we could bolt features onto this infrastructure. Or would it make more sense as a 5 to 10 year decision to rebuild it, like if we were to build Aura from scratch today, would it be the same architecture as it was 7 years ago? The clear answer was no. So we said, okay, well, that's what we need to do. So we had all this feedback from users, and we basically pulled it all together, organized it, and said, great, what we're going to do here is we're going to rebuild it from the ground up. Every line of code has been rewritten. We actually moved to a different language even, and even the architecture. So how we define even what repricing is has changed. And I think that's important because it's enabled interesting new features to come about, especially when you factor in at the time, developers were being pushed out of the MWS API and into the new SP API, which has some unique advantages, but you have to have the architecture to support some of those things. We were already doing that, so it actually made sense for us. So what we wanted to do is just have not only a better foundation for what we can do, make it easier to add integrations, new features, all this way more data, but also redefine kind of the product itself, right? So we redesigned it. Even it's still familiar in terms of like where you go to get things done, but we've really thought through. So we actually hired a product designer, Tasso, on our team, and his sole job is how do you design this to be easy to use, effective, efficient, all that stuff. And so we actually tested prototypes with like 300 users before we even wrote a line of code, just to make sure our thought process was right. And we went through so many iterations, even to get to a point where we're like, yeah, this makes sense. And it's scalable, so we can add new features on top of even the design. So when we launched 1.0, we really wanted it not only to be that better foundation, but also a ton more features, a lot of quality of life stuff. And just, we wanted it to be a better value for the price.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And anybody that's interested in checking out some of those changes, you can go to askjimmysmith.com/Aura, by the way. Now, one thing that I did want to mention is you call this Aura 1.0. Why is that? Since obviously you had a version before this. I had this question for you the other day, and so I'm curious what that is.
Yeah, so it's kind of playful, but it is actually accurate. So if you look in Legacy Aura, as we're now calling it, in the bottom left, there's a version. It's always been 0 point something. And we got it to 0.98, I believe. So 1.0 is us saying this is what Aura was meant to be. And as funny as it may sound, Legacy Aura to us was and is a beta.
Okay.
Granted, it's been a beta for like 7 years, but welcome to growing very quickly as a company. So it's kind of tongue in cheek, but it's also like we're signifying this is a major deal, right? We wouldn't say this is going from 0.98 to 0.99. No. This is a fundamentally different thing.
Okay.
And so if you're operating in software, you always have versions, right? You have a major, a minor, and then a patch. And so for us, this is a major change.
Wow. Okay. And so I know that we kind of started on the how has repricing changed, and you decided to make these decisions because you didn't want the software to, or you said that you would have rebuilt it differently, and that's what you did. So what were some of those foundational changes that caused this big change in code and the way you're writing it all?
Sure. Yeah. There's a few design decisions that back in the day made a lot of sense that right now don't. So one of those was essentially requiring a organic price change to come through for us to reflect the change you made in your settings. So a good example is if you change your minimum price in your strategy from 15 to 30% and click save, well, that could take anywhere from 15 minutes on average up to 3 hours for that to actually reflect on your SKUs, which is like, again, 7 years ago, totally made sense. Today, no. So now we've instituted a lot more like memory types. And so what I mean by that is every single SKU has something called listing memory or SKU memory, so that we can actually immediately reflect that change. So there is no wait. It's immediate. The moment you click save from that 15 to 30%, it got updated and it's replaying. We call it the replay system, the most recent organic price change. We already have that stored ready to go. So I like to say that Legacy Aura really feels reactive to organic price changes, but new Aura 1.0 is actually very responsive to you as a user. We've also implemented stuff like auto refresh. So there's 4 pages that do this every 5 seconds. Aura is just checking for updated information that you're not seeing. If we have it, we just push it live. You're not clicking a refresh button anymore. And that's important, right? Because the 2 big things that we see happening that are changing how you should think about your pricing, your SKUs, everything, really the whole business, is complexity and speed. So if you're looking at data on a page that's 5-10 minutes old, that's outdated to me already. And if you're making a decision based on that data and the data is outdated, well, so is your decision.
Okay.
And so how do we make it just just faster, right? As real time as we can get it, that's what we want to do. That way your decisions are as real time as they can be as well.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one thing too that I've always been fascinated with on repricers. Ever since I started, you'd see like the top tier was instant, but there's always kind of a little asterisk that that could be 15 minutes to, you know, however long it might be. So can
Yeah,
you explain what that is? So if people are looking at other repricers, what does
sure.
instant repricing typically mean versus what you're talking about with Aura?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is such an interesting thing, right? When a repricing company has a tier that says not anything that's not instant,
Mm-hmm.
all that means is that you're being penalized because you're paying less and you're being slowed down, meaning they're choosing to only reprice you once every 15 minutes or whatever happens to be that.
Mm-hmm.
That is their decision. It's not a limitation they have themselves. So when you get to instant repricing, let's define this more clearly. Instant repricing means on the software, so like Aura, we have always been instant repricing. We've never slowed you down. But to go round trip from when we submit a price update to when it gets confirmed back to us by Amazon, on average, anywhere from a minute and a half to 2 minutes round trip. So instant actually means round trip, minute and a half to 2 minutes, but it's instant on our end. And that's kind of an industry standard.
Mm-hmm.
So what's interesting is we've beaten instant repricing. So I don't have a term for that. I don't like, it's like, how do you
Yeah.
beat instant?
All right.
But we have, and part of this re-architecture and utilizing the SPA API in such unique ways, we found a way for up to 50 SKUs. There's a technical limit there. We can actually do that full round trip in 10 seconds.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In some cases, it's 5 seconds. Sometimes it's up to that 10 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So we've actually beaten instant repricing. I just don't have a good term better than instant without going into the past, but we call it hyperdrive.
Okay, there you go. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and that actually brings me to another question, because I know that two of the big changes, at least that I'm seeing you talk about as a company, are both Maven and hyperdrive. Can you kind of
Yeah.
explain what those are, what that means, how it's working?
Sure. Yeah. So when we started to rebuild the foundations, we eventually got to the AI stuff, and it's like AI is awesome. Like I'm that geek. I have it on my phone. Like I pretty much use it daily in some way, shape, or form. But it also gets overutilized as a term, which I'm not surprised by. This is happening in every industry. It sounds fancy and awesome, right? But AI is not a silver bullet. It doesn't just fix anything, right? Like if my barber has an AI, I don't know if that's better, right? So it actually has to make sense. And AI is such a broad term in terms of what system are you using? Is it deep learning? Is it reinforcement learning? So there's so many, but just because like basically certain models have great use cases for certain types of scenarios, and actually that same thing in a different scenario makes no sense. It actually would halt performance. So we took a step back and said, okay, well, what actually makes sense here? Because if it doesn't increase performance, then what's the point, right? You don't really care if it's AI, you care about the performance ultimately, right? If it happens to be AI, you're pretty excited, as we are.
Yeah.
So you first have to define what the problem is. And for us, again, it's complexity, added complexity and speed. Well, I already mentioned hyperdrive. That's kind of how we solve that speed. But complexity is an interesting one because Amazon's requiring more and more for you to handle infinite amounts of complexity at a faster rate. Humans can't really do that. And things change. There is no algorithm. There is no singular thing. What is actually happening is moment by moment fluctuations in the attributes, if you will, of every single SKU, right? A BSR and supply and demand for a toy in Q1 is completely different than that same toy in Q4. So how do you basically account for this fluctuation, this adaptation? Well, we realize the problem is not having a better strategy. The problem is leverage. It's how do we not give you, here's a bunch of AI-based strategies. That doesn't work. What you need is every single SKU should have its own unique strategy designed for it, factoring in as much data as you can to make it hyper-contextual and specific. And it should adapt and change over time. Why? Because that listing itself adapts and changes over time. Okay, so you don't need another strategy, you need a model. Turns out AI is actually a very good case for that. But you need two things. You, one, need it to actually do its own testing. Otherwise, there's not much intelligence, right? Intelligence really comes down to exploring, understanding what is true, and then utilizing that memory, as we call it, to then self-adjust. And so that's what Maven is designed to do. When you're talking about AI, you're really fine-tuning a model for a specific outcome. That specific outcome for Maven is a balance between profitability and sales velocity. We call that the optimal price. That changes moment by moment. So what's important here is you have one strategy. That the only setting, by the way, is you set your min prices. How do you want that? Do you want 10% ROI? You want 30% margin? You tell us. Max prices are automatically handled and abstracted away, but they're useful. And so how do we make it so that as a seller, you get to handle more complexity, more speed, but you have to do less? That's leverage for us. That's what we want. And so Maven was designed for that reason. That way, as you're going from Q4 to Q1, there's no adjustments you need to make to your strategies or accounts. It accounts for it for you. Okay. And so what's nice is we can get hyper specific, right? What we do is we actually study each of your competitors and run experiments. Okay. We understand that if I'm competing against you, I may need to be 5 cents beneath you to actually pull the buy box. Well, that's pretty important information, whether we need to or not. It's good for us to know. But if another seller comes on and all they're going to do is match us, I need to basically treat them differently. And so we can have this, and we can intentionally forget these things, because behaviors of sellers change over time too, by the way. When you first come onto a SKU, you tend to be a little conservative, right? But as time goes on, you're like, I need to move my inventory. You become more aggressive. So the model can factor that in. And so what's nice here is you don't have this hard predefined model strategy hybrid thing. You say, no, here's what the model is designed to factor in and understand, and then utilize that itself to self-optimize. Okay. And so what's nice is that model itself can be adjusted. What happens when now we have age of inventory as a metric and we factor that in? Does that actually increase the performance of the model, or does it not? Let's find that out. And so now what you have is a product strategy where you could wake up tomorrow and get an email and say, hey, the model's been updated to a new version that we've seen increase on average, performance by 10, 20%. You don't have to do anything. There's no new strategy you need to go explore and apply to everything. It's baked in. Okay. And so it's a different perspective in terms of how you manage your pricing, and really how repricing is kind of defined. When you're talking anything technical, it's really nice to be able to take a step back and not say, here's the hardcore algorithm that handles everything, and say, what if we built a model that could actually understand it and build the algorithm itself in real time? That's what we want.
Yeah, absolutely. So, regarding all of that, then who would you say is best suited for utilizing Aura? Because as we've briefly talked about, I don't necessarily come on here and say, this is the best repricer for everyone. Right. I say, hey, here's repricers, and these are the use cases I think they're best for. In your eyes, with Aura 1.0, who would it be best for?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we never want to be the cheapest, because I think that ends up holding back the company and creating really meaningful impact. Yeah. And two, we don't want to be the most premium either, because that then neglects the vast majority of sellers. For us, we're impact driven. So how do we find that balance? So with 1.0, we essentially introduce a more pro tier for the sellers that need that level of advanced features like Maven, all 50 hyperdrive credits. It's way more expensive for us to even run those resources, so it makes sense. And the impact is there, right? Like if you're doing 80,000 a month, you're gonna need to be able to have some leverage and just say, hey, I'm gonna apply one thing, and like it's perfectly optimized. I can go focus on continuing to scale. For newer sellers, the essential tier, so we have essential and pro. Pro has all the advanced stuff, but even the essential tier, we added so much there. So what's nice is we're not charging more. We didn't raise the prices. We just added more features, quality of life stuff. There's plenty of more we're about to start shipping as well and work on. So we're not done, definitely. That $97 tier is a good entry point, where it's not so cheap that you get held back, right? You're still getting instant repricing. You're still getting auto refreshing. You still have full mobile support, which, by the way, Aura is completely on mobile now. Like everything is designed for mobile first, which is awesome. Important. Yeah. So especially for RA sellers, like pulling out their laptops in their car and just pull out your phone. It's already in your hand anyways, right? Yeah. So that's important. So what we want to be is a good entry point for when it makes sense. When you're a brand new seller and you're doing $1,000 a month in sales, if price was not a thing, period, and repricing was just a free open source thing, then sure, you should use it because why not? But
Mhm.
it doesn't have a meaningful impact. And so for us, when the question comes up, when you start thinking about getting a repricing tool, I always say when the ROI becomes positive.
Mhm.
So if at $97, if it can make you at least 100, that's a positive ROI and probably a good starting point because it's going to compound over time, right?
Mhm.
Um, so are we for everyone? No, I don't. I agree with you, right? I don't think like any software is like we're for everyone. Like no, but
Yeah.
what we do want to be is a good middle ground where we can say, hey, listen, here's the intro point for like incredible product, incredible performance, where you're
Mhm.
not getting hindered
Right.
and as cheap as we can get that. And then as you are scaling up, and you're like, great, I've got like a team of 15 VAs. I'm in 5 different marketplaces, and I need to be able to have something that can kind of self-manage.
Mhm.
Awesome. We have that for you as well. So we want to be a good entry point and then a way to where you can scale with us as you're scaling your business.
Mm.
That's kind of how we think about it.
Awesome. Yeah. And would you say
Yeah.
that you're more arbitrage and wholesale versus like a private label seller?
Yeah. So we definitely don't support private label price optimization. That's something we're thinking about and
Okay.
exploring internally, but right now we're mainly resell based. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. And I know we've got to get to a demo here in a second, but I have a few more questions for you before we do,
Sure.
because some things have come up.
Yeah.
One thing that I do like to mention regarding Aura is out of every repricer I've ever recommended or seen, Aura is the only one that I can't remember somebody complaining directly to me about something with Aura,
Mhm.
which to me is a testament to the customer support you guys have and the work that
Yeah.
you put behind your product. So I just wanted to point that out there. It's very interesting because all the repricers that I've ever done videos on, there might be one or two people that have told me, hey, I don't like this or something happened here,
Yeah.
but I have not heard that necessarily with Aura that I can, remember. And so
Yeah.
I think that's a testament to you guys. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. I
One
appreciate that.
thing that I do have a question on that actually came up in one of the groups that I manage the other day is because the buy box rotates kind of regionally. I mean, you might have a different buy
Yeah.
box in Florida than you
Mhm.
do in California. How do repricers decide to reprice in those instances? How does like
Sure.
Keepa, pull back buy box data? How does that really
Yeah.
work on your end?
So you don't is the sad answer.
Yeah.
It's a great question. I wish we could
Mhm.
solve this. We're limited based on what data is available via the Amazon API, right?
Okay.
Regional buy boxes is just not even a concept in the API, and
Mhm.
so there we can't even build a model around that, like conceptually.
Yeah.
So you basically just have a global buy box, and then that's what everybody utilizes. So if you're using any tool and you're like, oh, cool, here's the buy box data, that is globally. Here's a hack though. Um, if you're using the right repricing tool and you have access to enough inventory, if it gets spread out enough, it's just going to have an amplification effect, right? So you're just going to get more sales. So basically, the way to hack regional buy boxes is to have inventory in that region.
Yeah.
That's really all it comes down to, right? It's that simple. So
Okay.
especially if you're doing wholesale, honestly, like we've had friends of sellers that just do some interesting experiments. And one of them, she's like, I just increased my volume by 30% just to see what would happen. And it was amazing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, interesting. Why is that? We looked into the data. Oh, because you are actually getting more regional buy boxes because as your volume goes up, so does your spreading out of your inventory regionally. So that's a good hack.
Yeah, that's amazing. One of my friends in the space that has actually been on the channel. Her name's Leah Modlin. She said that one of the
Yeah.
quickest things that grew her business was just testing double the amount of units. So instead of
Yeah.
testing 5 or 10, she would test 10 to 20. Right, and I'm
Yep.
like, that's I never really thought of that before because in my space it's all about arbitrage and testing small and then growing
Right.
slowly. But once you hit a certain point, if you've got the capital, start testing more and sending in more
Yeah.
product because Amazon appreciates that a lot of times. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
all right, I do want to get into the demo now, so that way we can show people kind of what Aura 1.0 looks like, how it feels,
Sure.
and some of the functionality behind it. So you go ahead and bring up your screen now.
Perfect.
Hey, Jimmy Smith here. And before I jump into the demo with Dillon from Aura, I wanted to just jump in and remind you that if you're interested in testing out Aura on their 14-day free trial, no credit card required at the time of this recording anyway, all you have to do is go to askjimmysmith.com/Aura. Now, Aura as a repricer has been the one that I've recommended the most over the years as it's been out because I have had so many positive feedback feedbacks from people that use Aura. I even recommend it in my book, Side Hustle to Full-Time Income. So if you're interested in checking out that free trial, all you have to do is go to askjimmysmith.com/Aura. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the demo with Dillon Carter so you can see how Aura works and what are the best setups and what are the workflows that you can do so that it can help cut down on your workload each and every day. So let's go ahead and get into this demo with Dillon.
Awesome. So we won't be able to cover everything. The list of changes, I love when users are like, oh gosh, how long do you have? Because there's a lot of small stuff too, right? But what I really want to hit is the big stuff. First and foremost, it's been completely redesigned from the ground up as well. It's still designed to be familiar in terms of like, you don't have to, if you're a current, legacy user, or you used this prior, you're not having to relearn a whole new system. We didn't want that. We wanted this hybrid approach to where we start to implement design changes that make it easier to use, as well as familiar enough to where when you jump in, you're like, oh, okay, this makes sense. I don't need training on this. I just kind of pick it up as I go. So at a very high level, I mentioned that we've been completely rebuilt from the ground up. One of the big things there is the replay system, which we already talked about, that allows us to go in and say, you know what, let me change my minimum on my strategy from 15 to 30%, click save, great, those are updating now, instantaneous, right? Way more responsive to the user. So every page you're going to see here, by the way, again, mobile optimized first. I think that's very important, especially for people doing RA and you're out and about. So there was also no more coming soon badges, which is wonderful. So buy box ownership percentage, you'll notice that is here now. We not only show this for you at the marketplace level, we show this per SKU, and I'll show the SKU page because that has the most changes. But first and foremost, we want a modern feeling design. We don't want this. I mean, I've been in the I've spent a third of my life in the Amazon space, either as a seller or on the software side. Data is awesome, but how it's presented is honestly way more important in my opinion. And so we wanted to take a more direct approach with that. So we added that. You also have units sold, so you can kind of see that volume moving over time. I think that's pretty important. And we did a few small things too, right? So like in Legacy Aura, at the very top here, you had the listing alerts section, which is nice, but the problem is twofold. Either one of two things happen. Either it's always there, and so you stop looking at it. It's the boy who cried wolf problem, so it defeats the purpose. Or it's all zeroed out, in which case now we're just wasting space. So we've actually moved those, right? So now we have listing alerts up here. So we'll actually show these to you, and they go away, right? So right now, we don't have any red alerts. So we don't see a red dot. If we had one red, we would actually see a red dot and lets us know, great, I need to go take a look at that, but it doesn't get in my way. And so if all these are sorted out, I don't have any alerts, which is super, super important. Also, if we go into settings, there's a few changes here at an organization level, right? So now we have multiple users. Old Aura, you basically just had one user per account. Now you have an organization and then users within that. So if we go to organization, you will actually be able to add your company name, storefront name. That's really the only thing there. But it's important because if you're scaling out and you happen to have multiple VAs having their own accounts, great, you can do that here. So we can go to team members. We can actually invite people, give them different permissions over time. Right now, everybody will be an admin, but we'll expand it out. And then integrations. So Inventory Lab, this used to take 24 to 48 hours for cost to import for new SKUs. Now it's instantaneous, which is awesome. So it's like just performance across the board. Everything just feels immediate, which is amazing. And then preferences, there's only one preference here, but this is an important one. We're transitioning from supporting just North America, which is 3 marketplaces, to all 20 globally.
Wow.
So now we allow you to say, you know what? Here's my default currency. We now have Canadian sellers that are like, great, I can set this to CAD because that's what I buy my inventory in. And that's super, super important. So you can start to customize things based on your situation more readily. There's a lot of stuff we want to add on to this as well.
Okay.
So a few changes there. And then if we go to listings, a lot of changes here, especially quality of life stuff. So first and foremost, you'll notice we have product images. And also this is just easier to look at on the brain, which is nice, right? It's funny. I geek out with like just different, like I geek out with everything, but how the brain perceives things and the different weights it assigns to it. So what's interesting is Legacy Aura, we didn't have any images. So if you're looking for a particular SKU, that's cognitively demanding, which means it's going to be painful to use. But the brain is really good at pattern recognition, especially with images. So now I don't have to read these anymore. I can just see exactly what I want to look for. That's
Right.
super important.
Hmm.
So it's going to be easier to use. But there's three really amazing changes here. Well, first one, before I do that, this page also has auto refresh. So I have it turned off right now. But as the prices are changing, we can sit here when it's on and just watch that happen in real time. We'll watch us go from out of the buy box at 42.76 to in the buy box at 42.75, just
Wow.
real time. So it's
Yeah.
almost like watching your trading account, right? It's just
Mhm.
happening in real time. So that's amazing. But there's three quality of life things here. The first one, I'm going to move our zoom here, is in the top right. So I mentioned this kind of being able to customize to your use cases. Every
Mhm.
seller that we looked at for this particular page, and this is a very important page, views inventory, or I'm sorry, views information differently and prioritizes it differently. What they care about is vastly different than the next seller. So we said, well, why are we deciding what matters to you? Why don't you just tell us? So the first version of this, we allow you to essentially decide what columns you want to see and which ones you want to hide. If you don't care about something, get rid of it. So a good example here, this is a demo account. There's really only the US marketplace, right? So,
Mhm.
well, if this is always Amazon US, I don't really care. Great, get it out of the way, right? We don't care. And what's nice is this is a saved configuration. So we can log in on any computer in our account. This will be saved and translated, and it's per user. So if you do have VAs in here using it and they're setting their own kind of customizations, it's not going to override yours, which is
Oh,
super
nice.
important.
Yeah.
Um, and then we've added inventory age as well as a new metric. So you got that. Um, the second version we'll eventually release is also allowing you to decide in what order you want to see this information,
Okay.
right? There's a whole problem with data like this where this is really the best way to show it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But you have this horizontal scroll problem, right? So because you can't remove horizontal scroll, what you
Mhm.
can do is allow users to get rid of data that they don't care about, and then that actually removes it. So for some users, they may not care about seeing this. Like I actually don't
Mhm.
see the max price here. Don't really care because all these are using Maven and the max price is automatic anyway, so it's gone.
Mhm.
So really, when I scroll, I'm only missing imported on, and actually I can get rid of that and have no horizontal scroll.
Mm.
So that's a nice quality of life thing, as well as the next one, which is filters. So in Legacy Aura, we had a lot of sorting and we had some filters, but they weren't really robust. And so
Mhm.
we wanted to change that. So the first version here, you can actually come in and stack these, right? So I could say, show me things where I am using this particular strategy and where, let's say, I am also using hyperdrive.
Mm.
Perfect. So we can stack these up, right? We can see very specific scenarios because a lot of sellers are coming here not to just scroll aimlessly. You're looking for something, either a
Mhm.
particular SKU, which you're going to search for, and I'll show you that in a moment, or a scenario that a SKU may fall into that you need to take action on. So we'll add way more filters in the future. We have a handful here. And what we'll do is also allow you to save these stacks as pre-configured settings. So you can save this name and say, this is my Monday view, as you will.
Okay.
Uh, cool hack for you, by the way. Actually, if you go up here in the URL address bar, this is how we're doing this. So what's nice is if you're like, oh man, I wish I could save this view, you can. So you can actually bookmark this page or just
Uh,
this URL and come back to the same configuration time and time again, which is pretty cool. So
yeah.
even little things like that, where we're utilizing the URL structure in a very unique way to
Mhm.
allow things like deep linking, searching, which I'll show you another version of that here. So the third thing here is search. So you're looking for two types of scenarios, either a particular SKU or a group of SKUs in some fashion. Either they fall into a certain scenario, which filters helps with, or maybe it's a brand. Maybe we're looking for all of our Yeti stuff. So this is called keyword search. Essentially, it allows us to do that. This is brand new as well. And it's really fast, which is amazing. Because sometimes you just need to see all your Nike stuff.
Mhm.
And that's important, right? Legacy Aura, you just could not do that. This was not feasible. So now that's solved. And what's nice is we can now take bulk actions on these, right? We can change our strategy, enable, disable,
Okay.
repricing, eventually hyperdrive as well. What's nice here, though, is we're searching within the SKU, product title, and ASIN.
Mm.
So we happen to throw some information in here, right? So if I type in, I think we have this one. Yes. So I'm searching Walmart.
Mhm.
That is not in the product title. It is a section of the SKU. So if you encode things in your SKUs, great. That's now useful for you.
Mhm.
If you put in dates, if you put in costs, if you put in the source, who sourced it, if you're using a VA team, great. You can now just say, show me all those. So now you can really group things in very unique ways. And what's interesting is we're also doing that in the address bar, right?
Nice. Yeah.
So I can change this to hot topic. There we go. So I'm a big fan of tools like Raycast, where it essentially allows me to create unique links and then a query. So I can actually just pull up the command bar, type in the shortcut for that one, and then type in what I want, and then it will actually send me to that address bar. Well, now with 1.0, I can search my SKUs without having to start in Aura. I can actually be anywhere on my computer and just type a quick search, hit enter, and I'm already there, filtered, ready to go.
That's
Right.
awesome.
So for a lot of your we're geeks, so like we like this kind of stuff, but for like power users and stuff, I mean, this really starts to add up.
Yeah. And that makes sense too with the Inventory Lab, sync that you have, because Inventory Lab has those custom SKUs. So anybody, I've recommended that for a while to my audience on YouTube. If it pulls over the store that you're buying from in that custom SKU, then it makes it a lot easier to search just about anywhere. So.
Exactly. And so the next thing here is actually just global search, right? So we've got a little indication here. So this is us trying to be more keyboard led. So if I hit the / on my keyboard, it's just going to push my cursor in there. I can start typing, right? I don't have to touch my mouse. This has also been rebuilt. So if we look at Yeti again, product images, as well as the market that we're selling this in. And I could use up and down arrows and then the return or enter on my keyboard to jump straight to it. So what's nice here is this is fast, right? I can jump back and forth as I see fit, which is nice, right? So as I'm jumping around, easy, super easy. Now, this is the updated SKU page or the listing page. So this is the most complex page. Why? We're trying to give you a ton of data without it being overwhelming. There's a hierarchy of thought here. So it works top to bottom. At the top, when you first land here without having to scroll, I want you to know at a quick glance what's true, what's happening. How are my sales doing? What are my settings? All that, right? Super easy. But I may need to potentially reference the same ASIN on a different marketplace. Great, I can do that. I can come in here and I can actually click back and forth between my Mexico one and then my US one, right? So we have this relationship now based on the ASIN. And we're creating layers of information. If we threw everything on this page, it would just be overwhelming. Nobody's going to want to use it, right? So the first version of this is like another layer. And so actually, if I click on the buy box here, this will bring up all offers. This page auto refreshes as well. So what's nice is I know where I am relative to the buy box, relative to the entire market. If I am the low end or the high end. And what's nice, if I'm like, who is this? Great, I can click on that and go straight to their storefront.
That's awesome.
So we could get really in the weeds if we need to, but it's not forced upon us, right? It's only when it makes sense. Because what you're doing is you're coming here to say what's true. Maybe you need to go a little bit deeper in your analysis on the data and then make a decision and take action. So, okay, we can see what's happening here. We can see our ROI. We can see a little bit more information here if we need to. And then if we scroll down, another version of this layering approach is if we look at the profit, right? So as we hover, we'll break things down more granular for you. You don't really need to see that granularity unless it's important to you now. So just allowing a hover state kind of solves that very easily without it being, again, so much data. And so we'll actually show you the current margin and the current ROI. And again, this page will auto refresh. So this is changing in real time as your price is changing. So there is no question as to what's my current ROI. I know my mins and my maxes, but typically that's a big range, right? That could be 10% minimum, 150% max. So where am I relative to that? Well, now there is no question. You can quickly see that.
Right.
Inventory is another great example of this. Let me show you a different SKU that has more inventory. These are all fulfillable. Oh, actually, they're not. This is great. Okay, so we will expand this out as we need to. I was onboarding a user and had 302 or 304 units and 13 different inventory statuses. So we showed all 13 different inventory statuses and the quantity in each status. This is important, right? Because there's a big difference between your listing being active and you having fulfillable inventory. What Ori cares more about is fulfillable inventory. Now we do understand that, out of stock, we handle that as well. So, there's settings for you to say, hey, when I'm out of stock, maybe go to my max price or something like that. So you don't have to go to Seller Central to say, well, where's my inventory, right? I know I have 12, but do I actually have even one fulfillable? Now we know what we have. So if we need to go deeper, we can go to Seller Central and see maybe there's a problem, but we can see exactly what's happening in real time. And then we have this new performance section. Again, we're going more in the weeds as we scale. And what's interesting is this settings, by the way, is scrolling with us. Why? The left side is where you're doing your analysis. The right side is where you're taking action. Well, if I decide something down here, I don't want to scroll back up to have to make a change. I just want to go over here and make it, right? So there's a few changes here. I mentioned the buy box ownership. You see that here for the particular SKU. You can also see the units moved in a period of time. Price updates, you're used to seeing this as pricing activity. We just changed the language here. And then your price. This is your price over a period of time. It's kind of like your personal Keepa. So we had a lot of sellers that were saying, I'm changing my strategy around and it looks like it's going well, but like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Well, now you do. Now we know exactly what is happening. So if we knew we changed our strategy, I can just on this view know, is my price going up or down? Is my buy box price or my buy box ownership percentage going up or down? Am I moving more units or less? I can view these four together in the same period of time and know exactly what the trend is and exactly what I need to do, if anything, to make a change. And when I'm ready to make a change, I just come over here, click edit, change it to whatever I want, and move on.
Okay. And
And
so
by the way, this will
regarding
be instantaneously reflected, right? We just changed the strategy. So now Aura is going to go and replay the last price change with the updated settings.
Okay, perfect. And regarding those strategies, how do you make the decision between all of those? Obviously there's Maven to break even. I assume that would be the minimum being break even. What does that even mean? Or do you have a spot where people can check that out in here?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we go over to strategies, here's where we can create that. And we have some support documentations in terms of how to think about it and create it. It depends on where you're at, right? If you're using the essential tier and you don't have access to Maven, it's a different kind of approach, in which case you're going to need multiple strategies. You're going to need your default that's going to handle 80% of your inventory. You're also going to need a liquidation one, which is probably going to automatically set your min ROI at 0% so we can move it more quickly. So it depends on kind of where you're at and how you think about your inventory. If we're utilizing Maven, from what we've seen, you really only need one. And funny enough, we've been recommending setting this minimum ROI or profit margin very low, because Maven's designed to find that balance, right? It's not trying to be aggressive for sales velocity and push the price down. It's actually intentionally trying to get you to the optimal price, which tends to be slightly above, if not pretty much well above the current buy box price. So by giving the model more range to test and figure things out, it actually does a better job from what we've seen on average. So it depends on what camp you're in, right? If you're kind of scaling out, you're on that pro tier, great. You're going to need less strategies. And that's kind of what Maven's designed to do. Say you as the user need to handle less complexities, because we're just going to handle that for you, and even more so than you ever could. So, and by the way, if you're getting started, like you mentioned this already, but like our support team is really on it. So you could jump in and be like, I'm brand new. I have no idea what to do. I'm very overwhelmed. Can you help? Absolutely. We're going to ask you a few questions to understand what your goals are. And we'll actually jump into your account and create the strategy for you in real time. And we'll explain, here's what we're doing. Here's why we're thinking about it. It's there. Do you want us to apply it to your account for you? How do you want your mins set? How do you think about that? Like, we're very conversational in that way. There's a reason why we do live chat. It allows us to have real feedback in real time and have real conversations versus you sending a request and getting a response 24 hours later. That's too long. Like, you need an answer now, right? So we tend to do things in real time. We don't have 24/7 support, and we're intentional about that. Typically what 24/7 support really means is everything's email, and then you're going to get a response when you get a response, and that could be 24 hours. So funny enough, by doing just business hours 9 to 5 EST, we have a faster response rate. So we can jump in and help. And if we need to schedule a Zoom call with you and help one-on-one, we'll do it too. I was doing one right before we jumped in. So,
that's awesome. And
yeah, we'll definitely
so,
support.
Yeah, I guess regarding some of the 0% profit margin stuff, what if you're doing wholesale and you've got map pricing? How does the AI work around map pricing, or work with it, I should say?
Yeah, so it really depends, right? So if we look at a particular SKU, let's go back to one of these here just as an example. So map price field, this here is really just reference, because a lot of times sellers won't follow map, and whether they're above it or below it, it's its own thing. But you still need a place to save that, and notes isn't really a great spot for that in our opinion. So what I tend to recommend, if you have a map price and you're following it, you need to manually set this at the min price. So I can actually override this and say, you know what, it really needs to be, I don't know, $70. Great, we can override that. We're good. So depending on how close the buy box is relative to the map price, which happens to be your min price, that can really affect positively or negatively any strategy, whether you're using Maven or a rule-based strategy. What tends to happen from what I've seen in wholesale is if you have a map price, the sales tend to be right there.
Yeah.
Right. It might fluctuate like 50 cents, but for the most part, it's probably going to be right there.
Okay.
So it really just depends. And there are definitely cases where the map price is far lower than the actual MSRP kind of ranges, in which case, great, you just have a lot of fluctuation and that's fine. So it's really listing by listing.
Okay, gotcha. And would there be any scenario, if you're on like the pro plan anyway, where
Yeah.
hyperdrive wouldn't be on, or do you just turn that on all of them? Like, how does that essentially work?
Yeah. Yeah. So hyperdrive is limited to 50 SKUs.
Okay.
So there is that technical limitation. If you're on the essential tier, by the way, you get 5 of those credits, so you can still utilize it. It's really for the SKUs that have tons of competition and speed matters.
Mm.
Now, what's interesting though is Maven does utilize hyperdrive.
Okay.
It has to do it very intentionally.
Mm.
So what's nice is for the most part, you don't have to necessarily have hyperdrive on if you're utilizing Maven. It's not going to use it every single time because it just have to spread it correctly. But it really just depends on where you're at. You can basically force it and say, hey, this one has to use hyperdrive. So if you're a newer seller and for whatever reason pro makes sense, you have all 50 credits and less than 50 SKUs, yeah, put it on all of them because why not, right? But eventually it gets to a point where you kind of have to decide which ones actually could utilize it in a better way. And so that's also a lot of manual work. We're already thinking about and designing some solution there. You know, as an example, let's call it autopilot, where it's a preference and you just say, hey, put hyperdrive on autopilot. Or it could actually scan your SKUs once an hour and say, which 50 actually need this now? And do that rebalance. And then the next hour, do it again.
Okay.
So ideally, we can put this on autopilot as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now I know that we're getting close to our time limitation. I am curious though on workflows. Would you mind kind of walking through
Sure.
workflows real quick? What that means for most sellers and how that would work?
Yeah, so workflows is cool. We're big fans of automation. We're geeks here, and so being big fans of Zapier, we use it pretty heavily. It was like, oh well, what if you could basically just tell Aura how to manage your listings, the things you're already doing, and it just have it automatically happen. And that's kind of where workflows came out. So workflows essentially have triggers. These are now called events, and then actions. So in Legacy Aura, you had one trigger and then however many actions you needed. We found there was a lot of redundancy where people would have the same set of actions, but have 5 different triggers, let's say throughout the day. They were time-based. And so there's a lot of redundancy. So we've actually updated this to where you can have multiple events trigger the same set of actions, either at different times, when SKUs come in, what have you. So the biggest workflow here is what happens when a new SKU gets listed? Well, you need to assign a strategy and you need to enable repricing. You also need to add a minimum price because that's required. But if you're using Inventory Lab, your cost is already there. And if your strategy, which it should be, is automatically sending your min prices, all you need is 2 things. You need your strategy assigned, the correct one, and you need repricing enabled. So what we can do is we can say, well, let's just make that automatic. We'll say when a new listing comes in, and just for example, we could say schedule as well. And we're going to do this every 3 hours. And we're only going to do it during the week. And then we're going to continue and go build our workflow. So we can say, you know what, let's do a filter block to make this really like complex. We can say if the SKU contains Walmart, I want to assign a specific strategy. And let's say I want to do Maven test. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to nest this in here. So what's going to happen is only the SKUs that are being filtered here are going to take this action. And then we'll take care of everything else. And we'll do set strategy. Basically, if it doesn't have that, we'll actually set it to break even. And then what we'll do is we'll toggle on repricing. Now, what's important here is the flow of which this occurs. So actually, I need to make a few changes. So what we recommend here is you start, what do you want everything to be? And then you get more niche as you go, because this happens sequentially, right? So if we were to run it this way, what would happen is we would set the strategy to Maven test for things containing Walmart, but then we would actually change it to this because this is
Okay.
happening globally. So I can just move this up here. Great, everything will get this, everything will get this. And then we'll say for SKUs that contain Walmart, it's actually going to change it to this. Hit continue, and this is going to be my new listing workflow. And so now what's going to happen is if a new listing comes in and every 3 hours, Monday through Friday, we're going to set it to using this strategy, enable repricing. And if it happens to contain Walmart, we'll actually change the strategy over. We'll finish that and then we can toggle that on. So this allows you to essentially take a lot of the workload that sellers do when they log into their accounts, managing, setting things up, enabling repricing, all that stuff, essentially putting that on autopilot with rules.
That's awesome, especially for like wholesale, or if you do have your own smaller private label brand that you're launching, you don't want everything to have the same repricing strategies. That's really important to kind of take that time away from you having to manage switching the different strategies and doing that all. It automatically happens. And that is going to bring me, I guess, to my last question, which is I've always kind of said that once you get a repricer, you kind of need to reprice your repricer. So what is kind of the work involved once sellers get fully set up? Maybe they've reached out to your support to help with these workflows. What kind of work do you expect most sellers would have to continue with if they're using Aura?
Yeah, especially for newer sellers that are on the essential tier, there is still going to be some management in terms of what strategy are you using per SKU. So what I tend to recommend is look at your performance. If things are going really well, you probably don't need to change anything. But if something goes a little off, there's probably a strategy being misused or a setting being misused. And so what tends to happen is a particular SKU is expected to perform a certain type of way, but it's not. In which case, the user would reach out to us and say, hey, here's the SKU. It feels wrong. That's all you have to tell us. We'll actually check your strategy settings, all the listing attributes, what's happening, and say, okay, well, is this correct? And if it is correct, then maybe we need to actually change the setting because the expectation from the user is incorrect. So we need to educate a little bit and make those changes. And other times it's, I'm not getting a lot of sales on this particular SKU using this strategy. So we take a look at it and we find that actually the strategy they're using is not the best strategy. Either their mins are being set too high, in which case their buy cost was just too high as well, in which we just need to deal with that. Or it's a very specific scenario. There are exceptions where the listing itself is just odd. I know that sounds like, what does that even mean? Like we just know it when we see it because you can feel it. We do this so often that we can just feel what's happening. Just looking at the data and we're like, all right, well, it's not, this is just such a different listing that it's what is happening is not expected. So let's go build a strategy to work within the confines of what is true for that particular SKU. This is also why Maven is so important because it does all that in real time for you. You kind of just forget about it. That's the whole point. So that's really it. If you have workflows set up to automatically assign the correct strategy, when a new SKU comes in, toggle it on, you have inventory labs as an example, pulling your costs in. It's relatively on autopilot, but you still have to manage the life cycle of your SKUs. So we can get it up and running day zero. Awesome. But what happens when you're holding inventory for 60 plus days? You probably want to change your strategy and start to move towards a liquidation strategy, in which case I would start to look in here. So I might jump in and enable, if we throw on, let's just say, what we're going to throw 60 to 180 days in here. I can then filter on these and say, okay, well, that's actually been there for a little while. Let me just go ahead and change my strategy to my liquidation strategy and just move on. So the workload is low, but you still need to come in here and manage it. Eventually, we'll have things like a new event for age of inventory. So you can say, hey, let me create a workflow where if my age of inventory is between this range, just move me actually to my liquidation strategy. When that changes, move me back to a regular strategy. So there's way more on the workflow side for users that we're trying to automate for them as well.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess too, I did have one more question that came up.
Sure.
If somebody does want to try out all the new AI features and everything, how long should they give that test? Because AI obviously has to learn your listings and learn the sellers. Are you going to see results day of, or is it, hey, try this out for a month or 2 months to see how this really affects your business?
It really varies, not wildly, but it does vary. So for sellers that are really on competitive SKUs, it could be the first day because it could take honestly a few hours, and it's up and running doing its thing, and it knows what's happening. On listings where there's less data flowing, it's going to take us a little bit longer, in which case that could take about a day, maybe two.
Okay.
We tend not to see it take more than a day or so to really get into a good groove and start moving.
Mm.
So you don't really need to give it even weeks. You'll
Mhm.
notice it within a few days.
Okay.
Again, just really depends. So what's nice here is the way we're structuring the free trial. So we don't ask for a credit card, anything like that. We want you to get in like, it's funny when people are like, oh, prove to me like the performance. Like, no, I'm not going to sell you on it. Like you jump in, let's help you out, get you set up, and you see the performance.
Mhm.
We're not salesy.
Yeah.
And so it's 14 days on us. And what we've done is we've decided that when you start a trial, you will be defaulting on the essential tier.
Mhm.
However, we will give you access to all the pro features for that same 14 period day. That way you can see with less friction if those features actually perform for you and if it's a good fit for you.
Mm.
Newer sellers, again, don't need super high end, crazy complexities.
Yeah.
But some sellers do. And so it's nice to just jump in, play with it, and be like, okay, maybe it actually is a great fit for me. Like I'm getting tons of value here, tons of increased performance. I'm going to stick with that. Or you jump in and you're like, yeah, I don't have a ton of SKUs. I'm just kind of getting up and running. Let me stay on the essential tier, and then great, not a problem, right? But at
Mhm.
least you got to experiment with it, because what we don't want to do is say, hey, you can start here in a limited capacity, and if you want to try it over here, you have to pay to upgrade to try it. It's like, no, 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 no. Like, let's see what really makes a good fit for you performance wise, because ultimately that's all that matters. Like,
Yeah.
what gives you better performance, and then that's what we should consider.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Well,
Yeah,
that was a lot of a lot faster too than I expected for some of the AI to adjust in sellers
yeah,
accounts. So that's awesome. Cause usually I
yeah,
hear it'll be a few weeks and we just want to, just make sure it's working. But that free trial is amazing for anybody that wants to
yeah,
check it out. You can use my link at askjimmysmith.com/aura. And yeah, go there and try it out for 14-day free trial. But Dillon, thank you so much, man, for jumping on and going through all of this with me. I'm really pumped to see what Aura can do for people's businesses. I've been recommending Aura for a long time, and I know that there's a lot of exciting changes. So thank you so
yeah,
much for being here, man.
yeah. Thanks for having me.
Have a good one. Hey, thank you so much for checking out the YouTube interview with Dillon Carter from Aura on Aura 1.0, their repricing features, this demo, everything that we just went through. It's an amazing video packed with a ton of information, especially on how repricing works. How does the buy box work? All of these things. So if you're interested in checking out Aura, getting access to their 14-day free trial, seeing if it works for your particular business, go over to askjimmysmith.com/Aura. That's AURA. And you'll be able to access their 14-day free trial. Again, as Dillon said, there's no credit card required, so you don't have to be worried about that. It is a very low friction ability to access their free trial at askjimmysmith.com/Aura. As a reminder, we do have that contest still running on this video to be entered in to win a copy of my book, Side Hustle to Full-Time Income. And all you have to do is leave a comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and tune in to the next video to see if you are the lucky winner. So hope this video helps you and blessed you, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day and a blessed rest of your week.